The show started, everyone. It's called Bring It In. Very excited to have you here. This is True Hoops, 11 a.m. daily pandemic from quarantine, lockdown, fun time show. Very excited today to be joined, as always, by David Thorpe and sports writer Jane McManus. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. So let's dig into your bio for a second. You're a columnist for the New York Daily News.
Mm-hmm.
You are the director of Marist Center for Sports Communications.
That's right.
You've covered New York sports since 1998, which includes 18 U.S. Opens, 2 NCAA Final Fours, 5 Super Bowls, the first season of the New York Liberty involving Teresa Weatherspoon, we were just talking about. Yep. And your roller derby name for a period was Lesley E. Visserate.
That's right. And I got prior approval from Lesley Visser before I completely absconded with her name.
Was it a tricky negotiation?
No, she actually loved it. She was totally thrilled by it. My other idea was Billie Jean Sting, and I actually ran that by Billie Jean as well, just to make sure that it would be okay. But then I liked Lesley Visserate a little bit more for the implied violence of it.
It's roller derby.
Which is kind of how I played. So worked out.
Yeah. We just went over your bio and you wanted to add basically that you kicked a lot of ass on the courts of New York City. That was kind of like the subtext a little
basketball court, not the
basketball courts.
You know, it's my bona fides. It's my basketball bona fides. So yeah, I played a ton of pickup in New York City when I first moved to the city in the early 90s. And I lived in Park Slope, so I played at Prospect Park Y. I played at a lot of, neighborhoods, and I bought my own genuine leather Wnba ball. My boyfriend and I went in on it together. It was a lot of money. I didn't have a lot of money at the time, but as you guys probably know, if you have the nicest ball, they let you play.
They do.
So you bring the leather ball to the court and you're in the game.
So this is, so I belong to the Prospect Park Y on 9th Avenue in like 1995. Is there a chance you played together?
Possibly. Now, did the two guys from Marcy Playground, were they in the pickup games with you?
Probably. That's what rings a bell.
The bassist and the drummer, Dan and Dylan were their names. But they played
all those New York City courts with the track around the top, like
exactly, and the weight room off to the side. Yeah, for sure. I actually brought Frank Isola and Mike Wise down once to play down there because Frank lived. For your viewers and listeners, Frank Isola was the longtime New York Daily News Knicks beat writer, and Mike Wise covered them for the New York Times at that time in the early 90s. And when I first got into the business, we talked a little basketball, and they were like, "I don't know if you really play," and I was like, "Well, let's come on down, and I'll show you." So I brought them down and we played in that gym. And it was just, it was like there was a lot happening there.
I think I'm right that there's a media lore anecdote that those two got in a fist fight one time. Do you know this story?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Mike Weiss told me the story of Mike Weiss getting in a fight with someone. I think it was Frank Isola, but anyway.
Well, they're like pals. They're best pals. So, sometimes you have to take your pal down.
So basically, Jane McManus goes hard, ladies and gentlemen. Marist University is like, what?
They're like, that's your contract.
So I gotta say, I was super excited to talk to you because I love how you're talking about the sports and the pandemic on Twitter, culminating in this quote the other day, which was, "Sports are the result of a functioning society, not a precursor." And before I let you respond to that, there's a little bit of a metaphor that occurred to me just in the prep for today, which is, let's say we were covering a basketball game and there was word of a meteor coming to destroy the stadium we were all in and we're all going to die. Like, suddenly in that moment, the journalism task is to understand like meteors and the tensile strength of a roof and all this weird crap that isn't fun, right? I feel like on sports media, a lot of people are like, "Oh, I don't like that. I'm not doing that." Like,
why are you being so negative about the meteor?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's right.
But I feel like you're hearing this bell and you're like, "Oh, I'll take on the task of this thing." Like,
right. Well, this is the moment. I mean, I think a lot of us got into sports writing because we love sports and we played and we were into it and we liked the personalities or we were inspired by it or something like that. And I'm no different, right? Like the 93, 94, 95 Knicks are why I'm a sports writer, no question, which is a different story. But, but I don't think this isn't the time to be a fan or to be rooting for sports. This is the time to be a reporter and to figure out, what you're saying, which is what's safe, what's prudent. I mean, I think we all want sports to be back, right? Like, I would love to be able to, draft a fantasy team in the NFL this year. But in order to be able to do that, certain conditions have to be met, right? We saw very clearly when Rudy Gobert tested positive and how no one wanted a part of that on that court that night. Understandably, like they're not hating sports because they don't want to get sick. So I think the idea is, well, what, then what can sports leagues do? And I honestly think this should be part of the conversation too. What can sports league do to help create an environment where it is safe for them to play? And I think they need to be involved in that conversation. So if I were the NFL or the NBA, I would be lobbying my local government, my state government, and the federal government to create conditions that would make it so that my players felt safe coming back to the field or the court or whatever. I don't think that conversation is necessarily being had. I think instead it's more like, well, we have to be able to ignore. When are we feeling comfortable enough to ignore the actual conditions on the ground to be able to play? And I think that's the wrong conversation.
Yeah. David, you had a good question. Maybe now's the moment.
If we had to press a reset button as a sports society and or as the government in general, and maybe even just go back to February 1, not January, even December, where they think they might have found the first virus infected person in late December, what could have been done differently to reach the point you just talked about?
Well, yes, I think that it has to be testing, because we just had no idea where this was. And, I remember, so back when the conversation, early March, when the conversation was, will we be able to have an NCAA tournament? I decided to do kind of a discussion about this, or just to find out more. So I called a physician and I said, well, what, let's walk through the process of being in a stadium or watching a game or playing a game and what that would look like and what's safe. And so he kind of took me through the idea of you're sitting next to someone, maybe you're sharing an armrest, maybe you're yelling, and so the droplets from your mouth are traveling a certain, area in front of you. Maybe on the court, you have someone throwing a ball in, it goes into the stands, if the ref touches it, then it's passed to somebody else. And so, all of these things can make for transmission. So the idea is you have to know who has something. So I would think it's a matter of testing. It's simple and plain, but you have to be able to say that the people who may be interacting in a way that would spread a virus don't have a virus. So that's exactly what you need. And I think we've gotten to a point now where, it's wildfire throughout the United States right now. And so we've gotten to a point where I think it's hard to justify using the resources for a sports team or a league when you have, people on the front lines who can't get tested very easily, or people who have mild symptoms who can't get tested very easily. So they're like, well, now we've created this situation where, it's a much bigger thing to get your arms around this. But if you could have had, if the United States had used the WHO tests or not had the flawed CDC test from the very beginning and been able to use it in a sports context, you might have been able to create conditions where things were more manageable. But now it's just everywhere. I'm sure you guys know people who have it. I know people who have it.
We had someone on the show yesterday.
Oh, that's right. Brandon Greer.
Really sick for 11 nights. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sounded like he had a terrible experience also as a young guy and having a hard time now even going out on a bike ride. Like, that's a nightmare.
It's
right.
bad.
Dana, Jane, you also taught, I said Dana because
Dana
there's a virus science for a week and I'm always reading her. And it seems like a lot of us,
like in our head.
It seems like a lot of us embrace, and Brandon, our guest yesterday, who went to China in 2020, everyone's wearing a mask. Why aren't our sports owners, to go right into what you were talking about, why aren't they demanding that everyone wears a mask all the time? Because besides the testing, which of course I agree with you on, it's another way we could possibly get back to some degree of normalcy if we're all wearing masks all the time. But they have to ask it. As owners, they have the ability to do powerful things, right?
Yeah, well, that's right. And this is something where I think that sports do have that power to pull us together. And if you had if you had Hall of Justice, for example, that had all of the commissioners and team owners and stuff like that kind of spoke with a unified voice, I think that would be one thing. Unfortunately, I think from the message from our federal government isn't a message, it's two messages. One coming one way, one that says we've got to restart things, and then the other that says we've got to wash our hands. And so I think it's very difficult to get to take away a real sense of, okay, I know where I need to muster my energy. And so unfortunately, I think these sports leagues and commissioners are, very tentative around Donald Trump, who's the president, and they don't want to get on the wrong side of him because then he's going to tweet. And then that, part of the fan base that also, is in the Make America Great Again camp is going to be angry. So that I think a lot of people have responded to this moment that needs great power and great passion with a sense of impotence, really. And I think that's what we're getting instead. Whereas, and again, I think very much that, because Donald Trump doesn't wear a mask and says he doesn't want to wear one, because Mike Pence, tours a hospital and doesn't wear a mask, the message is very mixed, right? It's sure people should wear masks, but we're not going to do that. And so I think you have then league owners that are kind of not sure what to do and they don't want to make people angry, as opposed to getting together and saying, what are the best practices here? We want sports back. I mean, sports fans are now watching sports from South Korea. Your live sports all summer are going to be from South Korea and Taiwan and La Liga or anybody else who can get their act together, because it's not going to be here unless people are ignoring conditions and making athletes unsafe.
Well, let me ask you, what's your degree of confidence that science will at some point take over here?
Well, so because of the mixed messages, and because there is not, all of our energy isn't being put in one direction in this country, and because the CDC just put together a bunch of guidelines that were shelved by the administration, I don't know that I have a lot of high degree of confidence in what's happening in the United States right now, unfortunately. And I hate to say that because I'm an American. I want us to lead in everything. And I'm used to having conditions be that, America leads in times of crises, and we're just not right now.
And you have a history of throwing elbows.
I do. I do. I've made conditions unsafe for other people. But I do have faith in an international scientific community. And, this is something that affects everyone in the world. And as you can see from what's happening in South Korea with KBO, everybody wants to play sports. Like, we want to be able to do that. So you had no new cases of coronavirus in South Korea for 2 straight days. And if you look at that broadcast, they're all wearing masks. There are no fans in the stand. So 2 straight days, no new cases. They had just over 10,000 cases in that country and under 300 deaths. Like, compare that to what we're dealing with in the United States. It's not even.
Well, we're going to get it by no new tests, right? That's the goal, to get that.
Exactly. We're gonna cut down our cases by not testing people. We'll just do the antibody test and they'll be like through the roof. Yeah. But mysteriously, no new cases.
I've maybe spent too much time thinking about the billionaires who run the NBA, but I felt a little bit like, okay, if there's a giant line of people for tests or food or whatever the thing is, like, speaking very metaphorically and broadly, these are people who know how to skip the line, right? Like, this is why you don't say anything that would offend Donald Trump, is because Mickey Arison, so he's the governor of the Heat and the chairman of Carnival Cruise Lines, right? Carnival Cruise Lines sent out cruises full of people making the money after the pandemic began. The person from the CDC oversees is like, this is not a quote. This was crackers, is what she said. There's no way it should have happened. This is Mickey Arison. Well, there's some New Yorker article, I think, where he's like calling Trump personally again and again and again and again, right? Mickey Arison's business hinges on Trump.
He's got a direct line to Donald Trump for some reason. It's amazing.
Right. So he just needs, like, it's not that he's scared of Trump. It's his business plan is Trump, right? Like, this is not the same method of thinking that will even cope with what's good for fans or players, right? Like, the people in line, like, whatever, man, they're going to be in line. Like, I got to get inside the building without waiting in that line. That's the point.
Right. And unfortunately, I mean, yes. And it's a really good way of doing business right now, apparently, just with some of the news that's coming out about contracts that are being handed out.
Did you see that New York Times story today?
I do too much reading about this subject because I'm a little bit obsessed by it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's a very effective plan ultimately. And I honestly don't know what you do about that for the next 6 months. You're going to have the cruise lines are going to be cutting in front of the line over, genuinely small businesses.
Yeah.
And that's a great tragedy. On the other hand, you have 33 million people who are out of work in the last 2 months or 6 weeks since this pandemic began. And even though I think we've been able to weather that fairly well now through an infrastructure that includes food banks and the relief package that came out from the federal government to individuals, but that's not going to last that long. And we're going to see real strain on our society. And unfortunately, until we can handle that, I mean, how do you devote resources to sports? And I know a lot of people are like, well, I want to escape through sports. And I totally get that. And in World War II, I think, people did escape through sports, and there were leagues and different ways that people could kind of seek entertainment in a movie theater or something like that. But the very nature of this thing means we can't sit down in movie theaters and we can't physically contact one another without fear of spreading. So you really do have to lower the level of contagion throughout the society before you can say, okay, now we're going to focus on sports. I think from a, and I don't think everybody wants to be responsible about it. And clearly we're seeing that now, but I think if you want to be responsible about it, that's the way to go. And so for like team owners and things like that, again, the Justice League getting together and saying, hey, we want to contribute to a way that we can make testing available more readily for people, or we're going to pay for those Abbott tests so that we can get them into the hands of people who need them. And then we can use them ourselves. That's a responsible way of doing it, as opposed to saying, I'm cutting the line like the cruise ship and I'm going to take what's mine and then see you suckers later. Like, those suckers are the fans.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing I was thinking about. I have players that I work with that play in Italy, and we've interviewed someone on the show that was in Italy getting some rehab treatment, a former NBA player who was stuck there when the pandemic first hit Italy. And I've read articles that there was a big soccer game between like Milano and another team. And not only were there 40,000 people in the stands, but both cities where those teams play had every bar packed with fans. And they know some huge number of people contracted the virus in one of those venues. Imagine, Jane, there's a lot of people like you that aren't just writing about sports, but are also aware of the whole virus thing. And more, I think, are starting to wake up to people like you and Henry, because Henry's been talking about this almost since Rudy Gobert tested positive, that we can't just talk about basketball anymore. You guys are going to connect the dots. If there's a game that opens up with fans, and 3 weeks later that area has a higher amount of positives, if it's even reported by the government, you're going to be tracing it yourselves. And if it finds out that 10,000 fans at an 80,000 seat NFL stadium are sick, like, that's it. I mean, forget about lawsuits, which are going to exist, but the league is shut down again right away. They got to be thinking about that.
That's exactly right. Are they going to do temperature checks this is the thing, is like, I'm not going a lot of places, but I certainly haven't seen like temperature checks at my grocery store or anything else. And clearly that's one way that other countries have gotten a handle on this thing, is by checking and seeing who's actually sick. And, we're not doing any of that stuff. You would have to do so much to make sure. I mean, there's some talk of like, if you wanted to go to something where there were going to be a lot of people gathered, having a test, being able to show that you've been tested in the last 24 or 48 hours, something like that. Again, we don't have the testing capacity for you to be able to be tested every time you want to go to a game, for 80,000 fans to fill up a stadium or whatever. So we don't even have anything like that. But I think that if I'm a team owner, yeah, I'm going to make money, but do I want to make people sick? And knowing that that's actually something that could happen, I would hope it's a moral question for team owners everywhere. I would certainly think it would be a moral question for state legislators and city officials and public health officials. And again, you can't have something like that happen if the consequence is 20 people die out of the 10,000 who got sick.
Right. Or get in a fight, because the first time someone coughs or sneezes at a football game, I've been at a lot of NFL games. Yeah. There's going to be some fights, right?
I had a coronavirus dream the other night. Now you bring this up, this is going to make me sound much worse than I am. But I dreamt that I was in line for something, and there was somebody, I was 6 feet behind and 6 feet behind and 6 feet behind. And then someone came up and they bumped into me. And in my dream, I I definitely retaliated.
Oh, come on. What's the whole story? Let's hear it. What'd you do?
I bashed the person's head into a brick wall. But
Oh my God.
come on, tell me you haven't had a dream like that. Like,
in the name of safety.
Right. For the greater good. The greater good.
I have issues, okay? I'm calling my therapist after this. But
no, we're your therapist. Don't worry, dude. It's fine. It's fine. No charge.
Yeah, exactly. But seriously though, you're right. Exactly, because people are on edge, right? Like everybody would have to be masked. The first person that kind of takes their mask off to have their churros or whatever they're eating at the stadium. I mean, and then coughs. Yes, exactly. People are going to be upset. And this idea of sitting people far away from each other. Yeah. That's impossible. There's a line for the bathroom.
Right.
So Live Nation is having a country and Western concert in Fort Smith, Arkansas this weekend. And it's like 20% capacity. And there was some line, to me, I was like, oh, of course they're going to keep like the concession booth closed. But instead what they said was that they're going to have lids on the food. And I'm like, I don't know if that cuts it. Like, I don't know. But
they don't understand.
We'll see how it goes.
See, I think this is the problem when you tell the CDC to shelve its recommendation, that instead of thinking smartly about this, people think stupidly. It's just, we're dumb people. I was saying like the other day, somebody says, oh, just use common sense when it comes to the pandemic. Well, my common sense doesn't know whether a virus travels 6 feet in the air or 2 feet. My common sense has no idea about that. So these ideas that we're going to somehow know what to do, or that the manager of a Costco is going to just common sense wise know how to open everything without having guidance in some form from someplace, is ridiculous. We don't know. We haven't lived through this. We don't know what to do. And that's why I think the thing that I think will get us out of this, is if it's not some sort of scientific breakthrough, is being smart about stuff, being cautious. And what I would think is, and what I would hope is that, the leagues are partnering with scientists, public health officials, people who could honestly try to clever us out of some of these issues that we will be facing. And there must be ways to do that. I think about the Kinja thermometer, right, which was able to detect spikes in different temperature populations based on region, right, like at the beginning of the pandemic. And they had some interesting data coming out, because people would take their temperature using this device, and then that temperature was automatically uploaded to a cloud. And then the Kinja database would be able to tell you, where pockets of temperature were. And usually that tells you about flu, but in this case, obviously, it could also tell you about coronavirus. And I'm just hoping that there are things like that, like innovations like that we're able to use, or best practices from other countries that'll give us some idea of how to move forward. Because I don't think, Brandon yesterday was saying how there are a lot of athletes that just aren't able to work out right now, right? Because you can't go to a gym. So if you don't have one in your house, how are you going to stay, NBA ready? And that's a great question. Like, how many of us and how many people are doing things very differently than we did them 6 weeks ago? And how does that then lead us to a place where the starting lineup looks different for different sports when they come back? Because we just don't, the players are not the same. Some players make it, some players don't. Some players take them over. We don't have feeder systems right now. What's going to happen with college sports, and, where those players usually come from? And, those are a lot of really big questions. I think the college question is even bigger in some ways.
I talked to a guy yesterday who works for an NBA team, and he has like one big question that hangs over him now. And he's like, what's going to happen when someone dies?
Right.
Like some coach, some player, somebody. And this is me projecting on him, but like, think of the NBA got crazy sensitive about being accused of jumping in line for tests. And they got very sensitive about the Lakers taking some bailout money and then returning it. How are they, like, if the blowback of somebody dying from getting an infection they got on the job in basketball will shut things down for an incredibly long time, I would imagine.
Well, two possibilities. Either that happens, or we become inured to it because we see it happen so much. And I think that we're in danger of that as well, of becoming, it would have to be somebody, it depends on who it is. If it's
that's how it works. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. If it's a big name, when Magic Johnson was diagnosed with AIDS, it made a huge difference for the way people thought about that disease and how the amount of attention and resources that disease got.
Yeah.
So, Tom Hanks being diagnosed with the coronavirus, had he died, would that have made a difference in the way that people took things seriously? I don't know, but I think, unfortunately, we're very bad at managing risk and assessing risk. So until something like that happens, people are, who could have, I read The Coming Plague in, 1997 after it came out, a year after it came out. To have people say, who could have thought we would have a pandemic is ridiculous. Many people
Every
thought.
expert?
Anyone who spent 10 minutes thinking about, disease vectors. Anybody who was around for AIDS, I remember I had a friend when I was a freshman in high school. One of my best friends and my locker mate from college was diagnosed with AIDS. And I thought he had 5 years. And thank goodness, knock on wood, he is alive and well and has, I visited him, he's visited me and my family and, here and he's on the West Coast. But, I really did think that was a death sentence for him and things really did change. Really did change in the way that disease could be treated. But anybody who was around for that or cared about somebody who had that would obviously understand. I mean, came of age in that time. I was afraid I could get it as well.
Right.
I definitely lived in fear of that and was tested for it on a number of occasions as a young person in college. But
it's not just youth.
Right, but
we can talk about it another time.
That situation now has flip-flopped where the senior citizens in sports, of which there are a huge amount of them in executive and coaching positions, they're worried. I texted Henry this morning, or maybe it was yesterday. A friend of mine's an assistant coach at a really good college, a very high-level program, and this is the time of year where scholarship renewals have to be signed. So because they're all not 4-year deals, they're all 4 1-year deals. So he called his head coach and said, "Hey, coach, do you want me to run by and have you sign these things?" He said, No, don't do that. These guys are both senior citizens. And he said, "What, do you want me to have a grad assistant? Run them over?" I was like, "Oh, no, don't do that. Just send them to my secretary. We'll have them digitally signed." These guys are making a good living. They don't want to take any chances. And yet you can't have a game without the coaches coaching. So
right.
You got to think about that too.
Right. And you're going to go from that to being to get a body on him,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the WNBA is supposed to start a week from today, I think.
The WNBA is such an interesting case because they have so many players who play abroad.
Yeah.
They, of course, just signed that new deal, which ends up raising their average salary to, a decent wage, right? They're actually, you don't have to necessarily, you can if you want, go play overseas now if you like doing that, but you might not have to do that given the changes to the CBA, which I think is, it's such a victory for Terry Jackson, who's the WNBA Players Association executive director, and those players. I mean, it's such a great thing. But I just know that there were a lot of players over there when in different teams abroad when this happened, and that's a really interesting. So they're going to be hyper aware of what is going on in terms of illness and the potential for transmission. So it's an interesting to see how they handle it, because again, I don't think you go from living in your home to, maybe there's some sort of workout that you can do, or you could say, we're going to disinfect every 6 hours this gym, and we're going to schedule shifts for people, where you can work out 3 at a time in different parts of the gym or whatever at a facility. That's what La Liga is starting to do now in Spain, and where they've had, obviously such a terrible time getting the coronavirus under control. But, you could see that start. And then if that can start, I don't see how you make the jump from working out in shifts at a fitness facility or a team facility to playing a game where you're making physical contact with another person without, a radical change in our ability to detect the virus.
Well, and Brandon made us think yesterday about the G League flies commercial, as does WNBA. And it was a thing in the negotiations.
So they can fly charter now. The new CBA has the WNBA. They can charter planes.
They can, but they're not required to, right? So to me, I'm if you're whatever billionaire we were just talking about, I haven't heard a legit sounding financial update on the state of the WNBA right now, but we assume it's a little bit of investment spending, a little deficit spending, right?
Yeah.
So are you going to do that? You know, it's going to be more expensive with the charters and no fans or very few fans. Like, are we really going to see it?
Well, I mean, yes and no. Here's another way to look at it. You could look at it that way, whether it's an investment that you don't necessarily want to make, or you could look at it as proving a concept where you have a smaller league with a smaller footprint, fewer teams, fewer cities, trying to figure out whether or not you can actually move a team around and keep them from getting, I don't know if they want to be guinea pigs necessarily in the WNBA. Right. Or pioneers, depending on how you look at it.
Guinea pioneers.
Spin it. We can spin it however we like. But that would be. I just think it's too soon, personally. The thing is, you can keep your options open until the moment that you can't. And a lot of leagues are keeping their options open and saying, well, we plan to have games in September. And that's great. And I plan to lose 10 pounds in the next 3 weeks. But actually I don't. I think I'm very happy with where I am. Just using that as an example. But I mean, that's the thing, is that we all have great, everybody's got a plan until you get punched, right? Like according to Tyson. And I think that's kind of what's happening here. And it's great to keep those plans in place. But then when, it comes time, like with the WNBA, to actually, put that plan into action, I think that's when you're going to see people really having to make new decisions.
I found myself freshly worried today, only because the bubble is still being discussed for Steph Curry and his friends, right? Okay, so the league's going to take the position that the magical money-making being of Steph Curry must be kept 1,000 miles from any other humans, even if it's at the cost of his entire family being imported and everything, and basically a sort of weird reality show of an existence. But you women, you can sit in this middle row. You'll be okay. You're a pioneer. Like,
right, exactly.
I don't think they'll be able to do that. It won't hold together.
Well, the good thing about it is, like, in sports, you have unions. And so those players all have a voice on their behalf, unlike the people in the meatpacking plants, unlike, everybody who's working grocery delivery or, I'm glad for the unions in sports right now, because that they're going to be looking out for those players. I wish there were stronger unions across the country looking out for workers as well. So, because I do think they're, this kind of open it up kind of mentality means that we're going to sacrifice people who don't want to be sacrificed. So, in some ways, this conversation that we're having, I really like it. And I wish it could be applied in other places to other people. And this is why I like covering sports, because we can think about these things. We think about them in this small sphere that we all really care about. And then you can also say, oh, wait a minute, this has an application in society at large. And I think we have to do that a lot with this kind of conversation.
Yeah.
The NFL talking about coming back, Henry. I thought I just read they're going to start opening up their facilities. That's a massive amount of people. Obviously, it's a very physical sport, not roller derby, but still very physical. We're going to get a chance to see what that looks like. They're all young, healthy. Their coaches aren't. Their coaches tend to be, well, actually, football players can be very obese, right? That's a good 20% of them are much bigger than they should be while they're playing. There's going to be an experiment that way before we even get to college football, I think. And with Henry's question of what happens if someone dies, I can just imagine a coach or a player gets sick and dies before there's even a game, and then there's no sports for a year. And this is my fear, as someone who really wants sports, is we tend to be so reactionary as not just as a species, but in America. That's why lots of legislation is passed after something horrific is happening, instead of doing it preventatively. And we're faced with that now, where we're going to be doing something horribly reactionary because of something horrible happening, instead of being preventive up front and avoiding that terrible thing. The NFL is, I think, going to be a big experiment with that, because they're silly enough to say, we're men, we're men, we'll go do it. And the virus doesn't care.
There's like one thing that could happen is that we'll do everything terribly and make all the wrong choices, and it'll turn out sort of okay. Like,
that's what they're hoping.
I guess that's the plan. Royce Webb, did you ever deal with Royce Webb at ESPN, Jane?
I didn't. Obviously I know who he is, but I did not personally. We didn't I didn't cover a lot of basketball at ESPN, so
Well, years ago, he went to grad school and has like basically a PhD and has read a lot more interesting and important things than I have. And he would sometimes like bestow them upon me in conversation. And one of them was that there's some research that like basically when people project the future, they under project innovation. So like new magical tools appear. They just always have. And you can't plan for them, but they do. And this is where I'm like a little bit like, I think these people, I'm referring to like the powers that be who are going to make these choices. I think they're going to do it terribly. And maybe they'll be saved by your European scientists or whatever, right? Like maybe they'll just be like, oh, thank God, worked out. Yay.
Yeah, and I think that as well. And that's why I mentioned like the thermometer that nobody would have known would be so important to give us certain information here. I do believe in that kind of innovation. And I also think that, these things are happening in record pace right now. And we have all of these people working on this around the world. And I hope that we've reached a point as a species where we can, put into place certain innovations. Now, do I hope that means that we can get sports going? I really just hope it means I don't get sick or that my family doesn't get sick and people don't die, and that we have sports back. So, my hope for it is not that we have some innovation, which means that, these 12 guys can be on a bench together. It's more that, that we can all live safely and get back. And I agree with that. And, it's so funny because like, I really have made a career on anticipating, like trying to anticipate, okay, what does this move in a roster mean for the team long-term? What is bringing in Tim Tebow mean for Mark Sanchez's development?
Don't get David started on Tim Tebow. We're never gonna come back.
Is he gonna play in the NBA next? Is he coming in?
If anyone could do it, I mean, he won't. The answer is no. But if
Jane,
anyone could do it,
serious.
somehow he'd figure out a way to do it.
Excellent. Okay. Hot topic alert.
Yeah,
no, but
if you want to talk about Tebow getting screwed by the NFL, lack of imagination, I'll have that conversation happily.
I had a front row seat for it. Are you kidding me? We could also talk about how Sanchez got screwed by that move. Oh, it was disastrous on both sides.
Well, that's the irony of what Henry talked about innovation after I just talked about the NFL. Sorry, those two things do not mix together at all. And Henry loves to use this phrase frequently with me in a critical but very constructive way. I'll say something, he'll say, but that's not a strategy, right? And so Henry's point is exactly right. We can hope for innovation, we all do, but it's not a strategy that anyone should be it's not even, you can't even call it a strategy. It isn't one. It's
right.
just hoping. And I really think that's exactly what's happening now, is
it's all we've got.
Everything's fine, and let's just hope it all works out okay. It's not a strategy.
No, it's not. It's not a strategy, but I think it is what people have right now, what they're kind of clinging to. Unfortunately, even at a federal level, in terms of
starting with the federal level.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But I was saying, like, my whole thing is like I like to anticipate things, and oftentimes when in my mind I'm going down roads about like, well, what could this mean for that, and what could that mean for that? You can kind of get yourself into some worst case scenarios, and so I always try to kind of examine my preconceived notions, whether they're negative or they're positive or what they might be going into, and think, am I assuming that things are going to go badly? Am I making assumptions with this? What are my assumptions that I'm making? How can I tease those out of the logic that I'm trying to apply to this situation? And I just, I have a relative who I bounce a lot of things off of, and was talking to her, and she's really smart and a kind of an overthinker as well. And so she was saying, I think you and I, when we think about things, we just think if we have enough information, if we're putting enough information into the equation, then we can get a good understanding of what a next step is, or what the best outcome is, or what might happen. And in this situation, that doesn't apply, because there's no amount of, there's so many unknowns that it doesn't really matter how much you read, how much you take in, how much you think. You still don't know. You're not necessarily any farther ahead than the person who's just hoping for the best. Right. So it's kind of a situation, I think, where people who do like to think and read and really think about stuff and puzzle their way through problems, unless you're, biomedical engineer, you're not going to get ahead of the game here. So, it really does feel like a very strange place to be.
Would it be okay if we all called your relative?
I'm actually named after her, so she's my Aunt Jane. Oh, and if you guys want to call Aunt Jane,
What
You
kind of
know?
time? What's good for her? What time's good for her?
All times. All times are good for her. She's not busy. Yeah.
You've been watching. I have not been watching. David's been watching. Everyone else watching The Last Dance.
Yes, I've been watching The Last Dance. I've been really enjoying it. I mean, not so much as the Knicks fan in 1993 when they went through that, but I loved seeing that old footage of, like Charles Oakley and Anthony Mason, and they were such tough, hardy. I really did kind of try to model myself as much as I could, right? But like in my head, I thought that, that I was Charles Oakley on a basketball court.
But by the way, that's amazing. So Jane wanted to be Oakley.
I did.
Our Tuesday guest, Adina, was Dennis Rodman.
Yeah.
You will not convince her she wasn't Dennis
She
Rodman.
literally
I
said, like,
love Adina.
every rebound was mine. She said it like very casually. Like,
She's awesome, by the way. I love her. She's
Yeah,
great.
she's
We worked
great.
together at W for a long time.
right.
So I mean, so seeing that old footage of all of the, all that old basketball footage was really great. And the heartbreak is real, but it's just like looking at the, the media table and seeing all those old great writers that I used to read, and who are, many of them are still around, some of them are not. And it's been really fun watching that. My one caveat is that we don't even have mentioned that he was married at any point in this.
Did you tweet that?
What's that?
Did you tweet that?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I was like, I'm curious about, the relationship with his wife and kids. And people are like, whoa, why would you want to care about that?
Yeah.
That's personal.
I know,
I think
exactly.
we saw her elbow once, right?
Now watch him talk about his dad.
Exactly. And people are like, well, his mom's in it. And I'm like, yeah. Your mom is always your best character witness too.
Exactly.
But I just, he's obviously a complicated dude. And I'm not necessarily looking for somebody to, like an ex-wife, to take him down a notch.
Right.
What I'm looking for is just a little bit more about what he was like to deal with, like on an up close basis, right? Like, what's it like to be intimate with somebody like Michael Jordan? And I think you can tell a lot. I mean, it used to be that when a biography was written about a great man, it was all about the men that he interacted with. And I think we've moved beyond that. We realize that, great men can be flawed in their personal lives, or not, or they can be tremendous family men, or be incredible fathers. And that kind of adds to their, in my thinking anyway, it just is good to know. It's part of their picture of who that person is. And so for me to completely have absolute blank in the space where he had a wife and family as he was winning all of these titles, it's just notable that, Michael Jordan, as executive director with, probably final say over what makes it or doesn't want that story told or even referred to. And we got 4 more of these left, which I will be watching. And so I could be completely wrong. And there, it could be, Wnba could come on for the next episode, tell her whole story, and I will be completely satisfied as a fan, and that will do it for me. And
I'll take the under on that one.
Yeah, it's funny that he said he was a little worried how he's going to be seen. That didn't ring true to me immediately because I knew he was executive producer, and having watched all 6 episodes, what's he worried about? That he cussed a couple times? I mean, he knows full well that's not the extent of things that people be upset about. That's about all that we've really seen, though.
It's so when I watch it, not being a Jordan, I mean, I was definitely a fan of his greatness and his ability to play. Like,
Right.
There was, but of him as a person, probably not a huge. I didn't hate him. I wasn't like anti-Jordan, but just not my kind of guy. Like, I like somebody who really kind of just kind of wrung it out a little bit more, like an Oakley. But he was always completely famous for managing his image and his brand. So I was hoping for a 10-part series where we get behind that a little bit.
Yeah.
And instead, we get a 10-part series, which is kind of a love letter to Michael Jordan as a young player, where he is managing the brand of the young player as an older retired player. So for me, I'm kind of like, I guess I'm on Ken Burns' side with that.
I was just going to say, that's what Ken Burns said, exactly. It's not a documentary.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's, you could do another 10-part series where somebody else does it and I'd still watch it. Like I'm not enjoying this. I'm enjoying it. but I just see it for kind of the point of view through which it's told, the lens. There's a big lens in front of this documentary for me.
I just feel like you make such an incredible point. It's like, okay, what can we say about the women in the story? Like, nothing. There's nothing. We got stuck at nothing.
And I love how people are like, yeah, you shouldn't say anything about them. Like, what are they gonna say? Like,
you already had that dream with the face and the brick wall.
Exactly.
His mom is a lovely lady. I'm really glad she was on. She looks fantastic.
What is she doing to her skin? Because I am like,
it's unbelievable, and
it's incredible.
And the one thing I'll say about Jordan, I mean, we have lots of mutual friends. We had a guy on Monday, an agent, Bernie Lee, who used to go to the 5-star basketball camp as a coach, and I did too. And Jordan is famous for kind of, he went to 5-star when he was kind of an unknown player. He was amazing, but he wasn't well known nationally. Jordan is an interesting study in one thing. He is old school from the standpoint of he does shake your hand after you beat him, right? There is a process he follows as an athlete. And remember, he played for Dean Smith and wasn't allowed to talk to the press as a freshman at all. And James Worthy said on the documentary, I haven't told this to Henry, Worthy said, James Worthy was the National Player of the Year his junior year. He was the first pick in the draft. He said, I was the best player on our team in North Carolina for 2 weeks. And then that's incredible.
It was incredible statement.
For Jordan to do that. And yet Jordan followed the rules. And every game he ever played in Chicago, he wore North Carolina shorts under his Bulls shorts. Like, it meant something to him. He never complained about not talking as a freshman. He revered his Carolina experience. That's why your point of another 10 episodes would be great, because that is an interesting contrast to what we know he is as a man, right? As a family man, as a teammate, punching guys in the head, constantly ridiculing them. There's a lot more there than I talk about.
Scott Burrell, what he says to Scott Burrell, where he's constantly needling him. And we've only had a couple, I mean, I actually credit him for putting that in this documentary, because, he's not a nice guy. Like, he's kind of a dick as a teammate. Yeah. But also this incredible competitiveness and just a complete beauty on the court. And it is such a contrast. And you wonder, like, well, okay, if he didn't have that, that kind of sense of one-upmanship in every single arena in his life, would he have been able to bring it to the court? And I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is, because we've never seen anybody like him. It's incredible.
Yeah. Those are all testosterone, right? Like, every single one of those components is associated with testosterone, right? He's that. Yeah. Can we bring Gerard on?
Really alpha. It's like an alpha idea, right? Of what an alpha is. He was it.
Yeah.
Right, but you can do both, though. Yeah. Henry and I like to be bosses. In my basketball world, I tend to be the one that's making all the decisions. I'm also very happy to follow someone I respect as a leader. It takes a little stress off me, and I get to learn. Like, you can be both. It didn't, and I will say this about Jordan too. He did do a good job of building up Scottie Pippen, who needed it. It can't be easy to be the second best player when that guy's your first best player.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe Scottie wasn't as respected as he probably should have been because Jordan was there. I don't know, but Scottie clearly became this incredible player, and he may not have had Michael treated him like he did Scott Burrell and lots of other teammates. That's a fair question.
Now that we have like 2 minutes left, I'm going to open a really complicated can of worms. And Drod, you're going to have my back here, right?
Maybe. We'll see what you say.
Sure. So
I was going to say, David, I tilted this for you, David. I wore this just for you, my guy.
I don't wear Gator stuff anymore.
That's leading the witness.
Thank you.
A lot of people out and about in Paris.
You listen. This is what, Jane, by the way, you are one of the only people who get that right away. You're like, oh, that
was really good.
Well, I lived in the UK for 2 years, so we went to Paris quite a bit.
You can see Paris from there, right? I'm just kidding.
From my house.
I guess he can. Okay, no, wrong conversation. Anyway, continue.
So here's this little point. So I did this giant investigative research thing about William Wesley a long time ago, who was there in Michael Jordan's inner circle during this whole period. And we talked a lot, and I learned a lot about what their concerns were and what they were. And basically, America had never loved a black man very much. That before Jordan, right?
We kind of still don't.
Well, Jordan did okay for himself. You know what I mean? But so there was this sense of like, you won't be loved if we just tell you how it is, right? The raw version of Jordan America won't go for that. White America won't go for that. So we're going to manicure something, right? Like we're going to manufacture a character who wears suits, which he didn't like to do, like who shows up on time and smiles and wears Hanes underwear and is on brand and on point. And like, so to me, like, it's not surprising that as executive producer of this thing, he would have this conviction that it won't be the raw version, right? That was never going to work.
Well, this is what amassed the billions for him, right? I mean, you and President Obama said it very clearly. The mainstream in America, and you know what I mean when I say mainstream, will like Oprah Winfrey and Michael Jordan and Barack Obama if you fit within this certain purview. The minute you step out of that and start doing quote unquote Black things, well, we got problems now, right? So, I mean, you look at, I mean, that statement Barack made was the most Black thing he said about being Black than any time he ever said being a president, because he couldn't. Like, I mean, he wore a tan suit and it was the end of the world, right? Like, this is what happens when, you know, and Howard Bryant writes about this stuff so eloquently, like, this is the burden, right, of being Black. Like, you're a high achiever, but you also have to do all these other extra things. And it's not fair, but it's, you know, that is our lot. And I'm not saying myself, I'm not a high achiever, but you know.
How many Nikes would Jordan have sold if he had Allen Iverson's cornrows?
Well, David, I mean, there's a photo
he would have kept his hood cred for sure. Hood cred would have been fine. That other side out.
Right.
There was when he was a rookie, there was a photo of him in a sweatsuit with a big gold medallion, and it was that was the end of it. They were like, whoa, like meetings, like, we have to put a stop to this. And that's when he started becoming, like, after that, it was like a suit every time. And then he started moving product, you know, then he started.
By the way, if you remember in the documentary, this is why Jordan's so revered still among the mainstream and still within Black communities, right? Because he hangs around dudes who he just likes. I mean, Slim Bowler, like, if you do any kind of, like, I mean, a great character. We need a 10-part series on just Slim Bowler. He's fantastic. I love that guy. Like, but that's Jordan would hang with whomever, right? Because that's just who he was. He wouldn't judge people based on that's not his thesis. If I like you and we're gonna hang. That's our deal. Like, and that's how he was still able to, despite having the manicured suits and all that for Nike and the corporate stuff, he was still able to be loved if he showed up anywhere in like Chicago or if he went to Harlem or the Rock. It'd be cool because you roll with that guy.
But then, yeah, if you have $20 you can throw into the quarters game, he's all about it. No, I noticed also in the documentary that, like, his first year he was wearing a gold chain, like not a huge one, but it went away. It went away.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. One of the things that I think we all, like, at least I always tell myself when watching this Jordan stuff, is we give him all this credit for being, as you said, Henry, the dominant alpha male, the huge competitor, all that stuff. He's also an extremely hard worker. Like, I mean, you don't get that good with just the alpha male testosterone, right? Like, you have to be an extremely hard worker. I know, Coach, you can relate to that.
I give this speech all the time when I used to travel internationally, and hopefully one day we'll be able to do that again. Most of these countries don't, like, I went to Turkey for many years. There are no Black people in Turkey, and I told them the NBA is not full of Black people because of the color of their skin. They work their asses off, as anyone has to do, including you. We had Hito Turkoglu, I think, when he was 14 years old. I didn't know him then. He was just a camper. But you just got to spend incredible amounts of time working on your game, working on your body. That's the only secret. Nothing else really matters. That's the secret. And Jordan, yes, he's known for that, not just for his trainer and Tim Grover. He worked on his game all the time. He worked on his jump shot all the time. He became an amazing low post scorer. His ball handling got much, much better over time. There's no secret. That is how all these guys do it.
So we're almost out of time. Go ahead, Jane.
I was just gonna say, and that's part of the reason, like, that I could never dislike him as even though, like, he wasn't my kind of person necessarily. Like, I could never fault him as a player for the choices that he made during that time, because he was in a box. Like, he didn't have the latitude that other people did to screw up. And so I kind of always felt like, well, if that's what he's got to do, then, that's what he's got to do. And I think, in some ways I respect him for that. I really do. Even though, like, I wouldn't want to necessarily be married to him or hang out with him or be the, rookie on the team.
if
but
he was a little less petty.
Yeah.
He's a lot more loved. I mean, Charles Barkley came out yesterday. Like, he's really hurt that they don't talk anymore because he made one critical statement about how Charlotte was being run.
A true
Probably because
statement.
Barkley wanted the GM. Is my guess is that was his motivation, is you should hire me to run the team. But you're hiring a bunch of ass kissers and now you stink. And they don't talk anymore. And that pettiness, we don't normally, like, Bill Gates isn't that petty, right? He's a flawed man. He's not that petty. He gets shots at him all the time. Right now, he's getting shots all the time. Much worse shots, I should say, than what Jordan got from Barkley. And it makes it harder to embrace that part of him. He's just petty.
Jane, can I ask you one last question? Sports journalism is in a terrible state right now. What do you tell the young people that you talk to all the time about getting into sports journalism?
This is a great question. And I've got a number of different kind of fronts that I'm working this problem on at Marist. We're doing some research around this issue, which I hope will illuminate things. The research, of course, has been thrown into flux now with the way that the pandemic has affected sports media. You cannot have sports media necessarily without sports, although I know we're trying very hard. But I do tell young people right now that we are in between financial models for the sports media industry. And again, I can be a pessimist by nature, but in this one regard, I'm not. It's very bad out there for people in the middle of their career or toward the end of their career. But for young people getting into the business, you are cheap labor when people want to have less expensive people coming in. And there's this idea that, young people can do a lot because they have the technological skills that are needed, which they do. And also, we don't know what the next financial model is. I think it's pretty clear that the ad-based model is not going to be supporting newspapers for very much longer. So what's next? And somebody's going to come up with it. You talk about like this idea of the wild card of innovation. I believe there are a lot of people out there who are working on this. And I believe that by the time people right now who are coming into the business get to the middle of their career, it's going to look very different. In the meantime, though, I'm telling people that while this is happening and they don't, the internships have dried up and the first-time jobs just aren't there at the moment, what can you do to contribute? You could, contact tracing, interviewing people and tracking them down sounds a little bit like some of the skills that you need to be a good reporter. So, maybe you do that for 18 months. And then when, sports come back and their jobs come back, then you say, look what I did, look how I contributed, look how creative I was in this time and the skills that I developed. And here's my resume. So I don't think it's a, enjoy your basement kind of time. I think that it's, I think young people actually have to look themselves in the mirror and say, what kind of an adult do I want to be? How do I want to be part of society? And I think there are a lot of big questions there that people can answer for themselves in a really positive way.
Well, now I want to go to Marist.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jane. We'll be back tomorrow at 11. Thanks, everybody.